Kristi Weierbach, continuing our HR architecture series of webinars. This one is focused on the HR payroll fall cleaning. We definitely are shifting gears here now that the 90-degree weather is gone, and there's definitely a lot of activity in the fall that we need to be thinking about from an HR and payroll perspective. I promise that this session is not too content heavy, as was maybe some of the prior sessions when we were talking about the new overtime legislation and so forth, but I know most of you are eager to hear more about travel time, so we will talk about that a little bit more. And hopefully from this session, I might be able to provoke some thinking or ideas, or just, set the stage for you to have a successful fall season as we narrow down on the end of 2016. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to talk about a few friendly reminders. This is our usual that we normally do. There will be a survey at the end of this webinar, at which point we ask that you complete it, give us your honest feedback, because that definitely sets the stage for the content that we include in our webinars, some of the things we speak about on our blogs and posts and so forth. And we are definitely looking at 2017, and a lot of the feedback is being incorporated in those topics and the agenda that we have set for next year. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We will probably wait towards the end of the session to address any questions, unless Lois Ribner, who's my partner in crime here, decides that something's urgent or critical for the dialogue that we're having at that present time. But to keep things moving, we answer questions at the end, and if we receive an overwhelming amount of questions, we will go ahead and reach out to you individually via email or by phone call to answer any remaining questions that you might have. So, not sure how many of you on the webinar today saw the blog that we had sent out earlier in the year, and it was focused on doing an HR workout. So if you did see that blog, I want to ask you, how did you do with your HR workout? And if you're unfamiliar with what that was, I'm going to highlight it a little bit for you, for those who may not have seen that blog. Certainly you can go ahead and access that on my LinkedIn page or Stan Boness's website or LinkedIn page if you want to go back and see maybe the things that you didn't do and you maybe should have done this summer. So the summer workout, we talked about a warm-up phase, the actual workout itself, and then a cool-down process. So part of that warm-up process was to create a checklist, looking at those things that maybe you haven't tackled and they've been on your wish list or to-do list for quite some time. This was a great opportunity when sometimes, volumes of business slow down a little bit. You have the opportunity to tackle some of those outstanding projects or the ones that are collecting dust on your desk. So that was the focus of the checklist. Two of the items that might be part of that would be a summer dress code policy, summer work schedules, and, based upon what you did and the things that you were able to accomplish, take a few minutes to debrief, because as you go towards the cool down, that's exactly what you need to do, is measure your successes, even if they're very small, and then identify any outstanding items, because now you can tackle it this fall, hopefully. And certainly if you don't have the resources or capabilities, we would love to be able to help you, maybe knock some of those projects off your list so you can clean them up and not carry them over to the new year. So that was our summer workout. Hopefully all of you had a chance to make some progress this summer. And as we narrow in down on fall, we're going to look at focusing on dusting off those old policies. So there's quite a few in here that I like to think about as we narrow down towards the end of the year, and we think about inclement weather and the holidays and many different things occurring in the fall that we need to consider, revisit, or maybe just refresh our employees' memories as to what the company policy is and so forth. And yes, that dreaded DOL legislation certainly put a little bit of a spin on some of the things we're focusing on this fall. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit further about this in a few minutes, but I want to first ask you a question. Poll questions, please do answer them. We need 80% to 85% participation before we can move forward. So first question I have for you is, how do you currently pay your hourly employees or non-exempt individuals for time spent driving from your corporate location to a job site? Do you pay them a fixed amount per day, maybe $20 per day? Do you pay them an hourly rate equivalent to minimum wage or their normal hourly rate? Do you pay them nothing? And would this not be applicable because maybe you have all salary exempt individuals, or those hourly individuals who might be administrative assistants don't normally drive out of the office to a job site? So we'll give it a minute or so till we get the desired response. And as soon as we get the 85%, Lois is going to go ahead and display those results. They should be coming up on your screen. And as I can see that most of you are paying it hourly, which is great. Glad to hear it. Not surprised that we do have a couple people who handle it by paying a fixed amount or possibly not paying anything at all. And then a lot of you on the call too also don't face this situation, but maybe in the future you might. And so as I've been meeting with companies over the past couple months, I have heard mixed reviews, mixed feedback, if you will, on the practices surrounding travel time and how it's paid. And that's why we sent out a blog last week just to address that and to help educate our clients, non-clients, and just raise awareness to this issue. There were scenarios included in the blog, and we're not going to read through that specifically today, but should you have a unique scenario that was not covered, please reach out to me, because I have received a few inquiries either for further clarification or just with a unique scenario that they wanted to talk through about how best to handle it. So with travel time, it can be a little difficult, and I promise this is probably going to be the only difficult thing we talk about today, but I did want to just elaborate a little bit more on it because the feedback I received is people are interested in hearing more and knowing more. So when do you have to pay for travel time? I thought this illustration might be a little bit helpful, especially because I'm a visual person, and maybe it's going to be beneficial to use something that you could post up in your office if you need to. But essentially, you need to pay for all hours worked. And how that's defined is when an employee is truly engaged waiting to be worked or waiting to work. So an employee driving from their home to the shop or to the corporate location, whatever your terminology is in your industry, that is not considered hours worked and therefore doesn't have to be paid. Now, after the employee clocks in or reports to the corporate location and they drive to a client job site, that then is considered to be worked time and needs to be paid. So what if an employee skips that middle step and they drive right from their home to the job site? This is a very popular question that I received. Well, essentially you wouldn't have to pay them to drive from their home to the job site because, again, they're not engaged waiting to work. They're really waiting to be engaged. Now, if that employee does drive a significant amount further than they would to go to their normal, shop or corporate location, you might want to consider paying them for that additional time that they are spending on the road. So let's take myself as an example. I live 2 miles away from Stambaugh, Ness. It's about a 10-minute commute with traffic and red lights and so forth. Now, if I have to report to an event or function up in Harrisburg, that's an additional maybe 20-minute drive that I have to incur to get to work. So if I were an hourly employee, then Stambaugh Ness, rightfully wouldn't have to pay for me to drive up to Harrisburg. Certainly they'd reimburse me the mileage, but as far as paying me an hourly rate, they wouldn't have to do that. But they could be considerate and pay me maybe for the 20 minutes that's in addition to my normal 10-minute commute. So hopefully that provides a little bit of clarification because I think that might have been confusing with the scenarios that I had outlined, and because certainly that does happen. Now, let's say, for instance, you require your employees to report directly to the job site all the time, and you never require them to go to the shop or the corporate location. Then you wouldn't pay them for that time. However, what if those employees go to the shop voluntarily and decide, oh, let's carpool to save on the amount of gas and so forth? Because it's a voluntary situation, I would think that the same rule would apply, that you do not have to pay them. I haven't seen specific guidance from the Department of Labor or the IRS on that scenario, but that would be my thought and my defense if an auditor would question me on that. So that is something that hopefully I can get more clarification by reaching out to those entities. I just haven't done that in preparation for this webinar. So if I find out additional information that's critical to your practices, I certainly will share that through a subsequent blog or posting on one of our social media outlets. So let's talk about out-of-town travel, because this is another area that can be very gray and can add a level of complexity that's not so simple as the visual aid that we just walked through on the previous slide. So first, think about whether the activity is voluntary or involuntary. Are you requiring them to go to the function, the client, or whatever it may be out of town, or is it that they voluntarily want to go attend this, education summit, if you will? So knowing the difference between a voluntary and involuntary event or function is critical for working through whether or not and how an employee should be paid. And remember, if this is an exempt individual, none of this applies because they're paid a fixed salary every week regardless of where they're working, how many hours they work, and so forth. This is really centered around those hourly or non-exempt individuals. So you also want to take into consideration, are they working or traveling or attending the function during normal business hours, or is it outside of normal business hours? Two clear-cut examples would be that they're attending a function that's lasting from 8 to 5, which is what their normal work schedule is. Or they go to an evening cocktail event where it's outside of the normal business hours. So if it's during normal business hours, you have to pay them as you normally would. If it's outside of normal business hours, that's where the question of voluntary or involuntary occurs. So if you're requiring them to go to this cocktail function as a purpose for networking and building relationships, then you absolutely have to pay them. But if it's an event that you said, nope, I'm not required, there's nothing business that you're going to be doing, working, etc., and you voluntarily want to go to this event, then you would not have to pay them. But if they are performing work functions while they're at that event, so they are networking, they're building relationships with clients, they're entertaining, maybe checking email, that all now becomes considered hours worked and should be compensated. So if you have an individual traveling on a Sunday and they start traveling at 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, their flight is taking off right around 5 o'clock, you would have to pay them 3 to 5 o'clock, so 2 hours, because that's during normal business hours, even if it is on a weekend. So the time that they would be spending on a plane, on a train, as a passenger on transportation, you do not have to pay them. So you would not have to pay them from 5 to 10 that they're traveling to California. If they are, however, on this transportation and they are checking email because now wireless is available on your modes of transportation, then that would be considered hours worked and that would have to be compensated. So there's a lot of questions surrounding out-of-town travel, and these are the key things that you want to look for and work through during your unique scenarios as you may have somebody going out of town and whether or not you need to pay them any differently than if they were, working locally. If you have a scenario you just are struggling with, please reach out. I'd be happy to walk through it with you, give you some guidance and advice on, my opinion, my perspective of how I certainly would treat that individual. And I don't mind calling the IRS or the Department of Labor either on your behalf anonymously to, inquire further. I have done that for clients. So many ways in which we can help you work through some of this muddy terrain. So we are going to go ahead and shift topics here. And we are going to now dig into some of the other policies, procedures that you might have surrounding events and holidays and different things throughout the year that you want to focus on from an HR payroll perspective this fall. So holiday schedules are abound. It doesn't matter, what religious background you may have. There's a variety of different types of holidays that are recognized and, that employees participate in and so forth. And you also have the factor of what are the company paid holidays. So I do just have December's calendar up here as a visual, but certainly there are holidays in November that you need to be mindful of. But what is the company policy for paid holidays? Have you communicated the days that you plan to be closed? Have you communicated what it looks like for a non-exempt individual and what their paycheck would look like when you would close for, the paid holiday? Do they get paid? Do they need to work, an offsetting day? Do they get partial pay? Many different factors to consider based upon your own company policies. You also have the added factor where everybody says, hey, great time to take off and spend time with family. You might also have people that fall ill during this time frame. And so it's important to be able to schedule those accordingly and communicate who can and can't take vacation. You also might have a use it or lose it policy, and some of them may have banked their hours, and now everybody's looking to take off in the month of December. So be mindful, because that definitely could disrupt your business, disrupt work volumes, etc., and you might have to shift a few things around. So setting out blackout zones or blackout periods sometimes is helpful, especially if you know you have a critical client project that's coming to fruition the last week of December. So it's the time now to start looking forward at your pipeline for work, for client engagements and services and so forth, to determine, do you have to black out any time periods where you need all hands on deck, if you will. And then this year we're very fortunate because pay dates typically are Fridays. You might be semi-monthly, so it might fluctuate a little bit. But if you look at the Christmas holiday, it's on a Sunday, so that really shouldn't impact when you pay your employees. I'm assuming you probably, if your pay date was the 25th, you would be paying it on the 26th anyway. So just looking ahead at your pay dates, do any of your business closures impact that, and how should employees expect to get paid day prior, day after, and you want to be mindful of any state requirements that require you to pay one day ahead of time instead of after, if you will. So a few things here to just keep in mind surrounding the holidays, and things that you want to possibly communicate or refresh your employees' memories on how they're handled. And it might be important too for newly hired individuals who weren't here last year to know how you handled business closure for holidays and so forth. Another thing that we need to think about is our kids are back in school. And so with that are many different activities outside of business hours. Sometimes it interferes with business hours. Maybe there's a sporting event at 4 o'clock. There's holiday concerts. Things that could impact your employees' schedule, where they would want to take time off. Can you afford for them to take that time off? How are you going to handle that? Are you going to be kind and say, oh, that one's okay, but then you see a pattern and it becomes a big disruption to your organization? Do you need to look ahead and try to anticipate maybe some employees who don't behave properly, and just setting those expectations and boundaries surrounding, leaving work early, coming in late? Maybe you have parent-teacher conferences, things like that. In a lot of the professional services industries, you do have the ability to be flexible, but if you're in a manufacturing or hospitality environment, you may not have the ability to be that flexible. So definitely think about your policy and practice and communicate it accordingly so employees know what to expect. Similarly, employee children are in sports, and as a result, they're going to be looking to raise money, fundraisers. So how is that handled within your organization? Do you have a centralized place, maybe in the cafeteria, that employees can leave literature to encourage participation, buying pizzas, candy, etc.? Or do you have a no tolerance policy? And that's okay. No one said you have to allow fundraisers in the organization. What is your process? What are your thoughts? And maybe you have prior experience you can lean on as you think about how you want to handle it this year. The Department of Labor legislation has certainly impacted many areas, one of which is benefit open enrollment. And the reason I believe that it impacts this area is that if you have to modify the salaries for some of your exempt individuals, it might take away from the budget that you have available for some of the other things you do for your employees, such as benefits. So I have been out meeting with clients, and it seems to be that there's a 10% to 20% rate increase this year for healthcare premiums. So take that into consideration as you're looking towards, renewing your benefits. Are you going to shop it? Are you going to look to maybe a different broker? Are you going to try and keep everything the same because you have so many other things going on, and definitely you should be aggressively pursuing your benefits at this time because you have a couple months to be able to be prepared to roll those out and start allowing employees to enroll, make changes, etc. So wanted to call that out as an item you should be thinking about. I'm sure most of you already are, but just wanted to put it out there because it is relevant for this time of year when a majority of companies are going through their renewal, either a 12/1 or 1/1 date for that renewal or open enrollment. We do unfortunately have to talk about inclement weather. I know we were fearful because of last year here in Pennsylvania. We had 3 feet of snow with one storm alone, and it's my understanding that we're looking at another snowy winter on the East Coast. If you're in the West Coast, we're very jealous because we definitely would love to have your sunshine in January and February, but with inclement weather, there comes a variety of things that we need to think about. And communicating those policies sooner than later is very important. That way, if there's any additional action items, follow-up tasks that need to be accomplished, you have plenty of time to prepare. Because you could see a snow as early as November, but it could wait till January, so it's better to be prepared. I do want to talk about how you pay exempt versus non-exempt individuals when you have inclement weather. This was very important during a conversation I had this week, and I thought it would be helpful to share with all of you as well what the expectation is for your exempt and non-exempt employees. So if you close your business because of inclement weather, then you have to pay your exempt employees their normal salary amount. You cannot reduce it for any reason. If you close your organization because of inclement weather, you do not have to pay your hourly employees. If you choose to do so, that's at your discretion. It's not required by law. Just know that if you have to close a whole week or a substantial amount of time for a week, your employees could potentially go file for unemployment, which in your industry you may be used to having to do that anyway, especially if you're very seasonal like the construction industry. But keep that in mind that if you, as an organization, close your facility, you have to pay your exempt employees no matter what. Now, if you keep your business open for operation and your salary individual calls out and says, I'm unable to report, if they don't have enough paid time off available, vacation time, etc., that you will allow them to use, then you could dock their pay for whole day increment. So if that individual comes in late, shows up at 10 or 11 o'clock, you have to pay them for the full day. You cannot dock their pay. But if they completely call out saying they cannot report to work for the full day, they've exhausted all their paid time off, then you don't have to pay them. You can reduce their pay. So I thought that was important to note the difference between if you close versus them not showing. It's really a difference of are they ready and available to work or are they not? If they're ready and available and you don't have the work for them, then you have to pay them. But if they're not ready and available to work, but you are, then you don't have to pay them. So hopefully that gives you a little clarity in that way. And hopefully all of you are treating them properly. But if not, now's a great time to dust off that policy and make sure headed into this year that you do handle it properly because you may face business closure at some point this season. You also want to keep in mind safety because with inclement weather, whether you have ice or snow, you will have wet floors, so it could be a hazard for slipping and falling. So making sure you have the appropriate signs, maybe extra floor mats, just making sure employees are aware that that marble or tile floor can be very dangerous, if it's wet. Making sure maybe employees are wearing sneakers to work those days when you have a lot of snow outside might help offset instead of high heels. Just give them a little more traction. Keep in mind your sidewalks. Make sure that if they are icy, you're salting them. Identifying who is responsible for that. Who's going to make sure that the sidewalks are iced well in advance of employees arriving to work. And with winter storms, there's a variety of different scenarios that could occur. With driving, you want to make sure that employees don't risk their health or security in attempting to get to work and making sure you communicate that accordingly, letting them know that if you feel that you truly cannot make it to work, please don't drive and risk your health and security. We definitely don't want to be, that insensitive employer who says, you must report no matter what. If I got here, you can get here. And, I've worked for a few people like that, and it's really just Unfortunately, it's about perspective. It's about each individual's preference, and hopefully you don't have any habitual individuals that fall out of line and display unwelcomed behavior, if you will, or have excessive tardyism and use it as an opportunity just to miss some extra work. Certainly that could go over into disciplinary action, but just being mindful and being considerate and being a great employer who does put safety first of its employees before anything else. You should have a response plan or emergency response plan in place. So what does that look like? What is the action plan? What if your furnace goes out, during a very cold period of time? What if there's plumbing leaks? Because sometimes you have frozen pipes and so forth. Who is that committee that's going to spearhead? Who gets called? Who is going to start the phone tree to notify employees? Who's going to call the vendors? Who is going to be in charge of notifying clients? Because maybe it'll disrupt your client service. So many different things that come to mind with an emergency response plan that if you prepare well in advance, it could alleviate some additional back-end burden that you might have, frustrated clients because they can't get a hold of anybody. Because I'll be honest, I worked in an industry where clients on the West Coast did not care whether we had snow or not. So we actually had to put employees up in hotels to make sure that we had people available, to handle incoming client calls and questions and so forth. So that might be a consideration for you. And if it is, are you going to pay those individuals a little bit more because they did, sacrifice their personal time to be available and be able to be local to come into work and help you out, at a time when the business maybe not be able to open up for regular business hours. You also have the flu season upon us, so some companies may offer flu shots. I know a lot of companies seem to be going away from that just because of the accessibility within the pharmacies that, a lot of places are offering free flu shots or reduced rates on flu shots, so it might just be more convenient for employees to go take care of that on their own. But what is your sick pay policy? And, what can employees expect if they do have to call out? Do you have a policy where if they're out 3 or more days, they need to bring a doctor's note? If that's the case, make sure that they're aware of it. And certainly it might be in your handbook, but when's the last time that they picked it up and took a look at it? So you might just want to send out, a communication piece to them just to highlight some of the relevant policies for this time of year. It would definitely be helpful and maybe eliminate some of those questions or interruptions throughout your day with employees asking questions. So we will now go into our second poll question. Again, looking for 85% participation, but I want to know, when is the last time that you have updated your labor law posters? Have you done it since August? All right, looks like we're split. Some of you have and some of you haven't. Well, I wanted to bring to your attention that there were 2 federal updates that occurred in August requiring you to update your labor law posters. The one is about the employee polygraph notice. They removed the penalty amount up to $10,000 for violators. They also updated some contact numbers. And then the FLSA legislation caused an update to be made surrounding nursing mothers and the new OT rules. So you definitely want to get those federal posters updated. Certainly there's a host of state-specific updates that have happened too over the course of the year. If you would like additional information, just send me an email about those states, and I'd be happy to verify and confirm what updates were done and when you should have updated your labor law posters. So what else should we be thinking about? We talked about, quite a few HR items on here surrounding holidays, inclement weather, emergency response, and so forth. So there are quite a few other things that we want to take a look at, and hoping that the webinar will wrap up in about 20 minutes or so. That'll allow us a good 10 minutes to answer any questions, because I think we may have already received a few. So we'll keep moving here, and I'm curious, are you prepared for the updates that increase to the salary minimum requirement? goes in effect as of 12/1. It appears that there is some noise surrounding the legislation where people are filing lawsuits. Specifically, the small businesses are looking to get the legislation delayed. As soon as we're aware of any changes to the legislation, we will notify you and stay on top of that and stay informed. But I do know that the Society of Human Resource Management said that you should still proceed as if all of the changes are going into effect as of 12/1. So still keep moving through your action plan that we talked about a couple webinars ago, and make sure that you're in a good place to make these updates by 12/1. Certainly you might have a little extra time, but don't count on it at this time. We're going to go into our third poll question here because I'm curious. When were your job descriptions last updated? Was it within the past year? Was it more than a year ago? Have you never updated them? And some of you might be saying, what is a job description? So give me your feedback, and we'll post those results after we get to 85%. All right, here come the results. And this is pretty consistent with what I've been seeing out in the field as I'm doing my Department of Labor audit ready assessments. I have seen that a lot of companies have not updated their job descriptions. Some people have never done it. Some have done it 10 years ago. And for those of you who don't know what a job description is, we have about 6%. It's okay. Certainly I'll talk about it just a little bit, but more in-depth information, I'd love to have a conversation with you so I can make sure you're in a good spot. And you may be saying, well, why is this so important? Well, because when the Department of Labor auditor comes in, they are going to look at the job descriptions, and they're going to look at whether or not that job description aligns with the DOL regulations. Does that position truly qualify to be exempt? So that's one thing that I've been working with clients on is really, does it make sense that the essential functions of a person's position truly align with the legislation? And if not, then we have a decision to make. We either can update the language so it does more closely align, or we need to switch that individual to hourly. So a job description essentially, lists the title of the position. Sometimes you can put on there whether they're exempt or non-exempt. It's not required, but you oftentimes on the job description list who the individual reports to, if it's a manager, director, etc. You'll list a summary for that position. You will then identify all the essential functions surrounding that role. What do they do on a day in and day out basis? You do want to put a bullet point in there that other ad hoc projects as assigned. It gives you a little freedom to have them do additional work. You also want to put on there what are the minimum requirements or qualifications. How many years of experience do they need? Are there any specific degrees? Do they need to know how to utilize Microsoft product, items such as Word, Excel, etc. There might be other things relevant to your industry that you want to include on there that's a requirement for a person to qualify for that role. And lastly, you want to put on there physical and mental demands. Maybe they have to. Okay, here you go. I do apologize about that. The intercom turned on. But the physical and mental demands are important because if you require somebody to regularly lift 50 pounds throughout the day, it's important to note that on there because some individuals may not be able to perform that function. And lastly, you want to have a place for the employee to sign. That for me helps when I have to address any behavior issues. It also just helps with the dialogue to make sure that the job description is up to date, that the employee is attesting that, yes, that's what they do day in and day out. So that's why they're so important. And, the Department of Labor is going to look at how your employees are paid. They're going to look at the duties test to make sure that any exempt employees are truly, fulfilling a role that aligns with the legislation. And, the job description could potentially be used for work comp claims, maybe unemployment, or some other outside agency might have to lean on that to better understand, what that individual does on a daily basis. So it's a critical part of your organization. So if you haven't updated them or you don't have any, or maybe you're missing a few, definitely want to put that on your fall action item list and get that taken care of as quickly as possible. If you don't know where to start and you want help, please call me. I'd love to help you because I am helping a bunch of other clients at this time with going through this exact exercise. In addition, we also are analyzing to make sure, does it make sense based upon the organizational structure? What does this look like? And do the roles really align? And, from a compensation perspective, does it make sense that one is exempt or non-exempt? And just want to make sure that you don't have an individual fulfilling an engineer role that's exempt and another one that's non-exempt, because that really is mismatched information and you might have somebody misclassified. So definitely a hot area that does require your attention and should be focused on this fall. Personnel files, this might be a great time to take an inventory of what is in the personnel files. Maybe you have some paperwork that's built up on your desk and you want to go ahead and get that filed away. Make sure the filing is current so it's easy to pull out documents should you need it. And you also want to make sure that you have your files separated. I know we've talked about this a few other times, but it can be confusing. So you do want to have a general personnel file that houses the tax forms, maybe the application, all that new hire paperwork that you've accumulated, maybe, PTO request off and so forth. Your second file really should have that protected health information, so benefit enrollment forms, child support orders, garnishments, etc. And then the last piece that you want to make sure is separated are the I-9s. I typically don't create an individual file per person. All I do is create a binder, one for my active employees and one for my terminated. That way I can easily manage them outside of the personnel files. So those are the ways in which you should store your personnel files. I shouldn't have to remind you, but you should keep them locked at all times. If the filing cabinet doesn't remain locked, then definitely make sure that the office in which they're stored can be locked, especially overnight when there's nobody monitoring and watching to make sure that, unauthorized personnel don't have access to those files. This is a perfect time of year for those payroll vendors to be knocking at your door. I'm sure you probably have received increased volume of calls from like an ADP or Paychex, etc. It is a great time to do that evaluation. October is a popular month to make a switch, also January 1st, but don't think you have to switch right on a quarter because all of your payroll vendors can handle switching mid-quarter. Sometimes it might be less of a burden if you do it mid-quarter. But when I go through a payroll evaluation, what I look for first and foremost is service. Am I receiving excellent service, or is there an opportunity that another vendor could provide me with better service? Next would be functionality. What functionality am I getting? Is it cost effective? How does it rate among the other vendors and what they're offering? Because that's so important for not only tracking information, but running reports and doing analysis on your workforce. And then third is cost. I know some of you might have to put cost up at the top just for budget reasons, but cost, in my opinion, is the third on the list. Definitely you don't want to pay an exorbitant amount because there are companies out there that offer wonderful solutions at reasonable prices. So if you have any questions, about a payroll evaluation, call me up. I love talking about it. But don't be afraid to go out to bid. If it's been 2 or 3 years since you've implemented your payroll, go out to bid. You can either drive down your current provider and get better pricing headed into the new year. Might offset some of those salary adjustments that you have to do with the overtime legislation, or you might find that some other vendor is a little more ahead of the game with technology, and you might be able to get more functionality at the same price that you're paying now. So definitely consider that, and good luck if you do. It definitely could be very beneficial to you. Fringe benefits, I'm going to talk about this just very briefly. This is something you want to work towards now rather than waiting till December or January to think about it. We will be having a webinar in October. Actually, it's going to be the first week of November there. We had to bump it back just a little bit. But it will be the last of our HR architecture series for this year. That webinar will dive deep into the fringe benefits. And then, as many of you may have participated in the past in either our year-end seminar or the year-end webinar that we hold in November and December, we will also repeat the information and dig deep into those fringe benefits because it's a topic that is very confusing to many people. We at Stanville Ness have the opportunity to bring together not only the HR and payroll perspective, but we also bring the accounting and tax perspective as well. So we definitely can help you feel better about fringe benefits and why you have to do anything at all with them. Specifically, areas that we'll be covering is the personal use of a company car, cell phone reimbursements, S-Corp health. I don't have it listed on here, but tuition reimbursements, moving expenses, a lot of things that you need to take into consideration at year end as to what is or isn't considered taxable income to your employees. So more on that. If you haven't registered yet, please go out and register for the October webinar, as well as one of our year-end seminars or the webinar that we have. Year-end bonuses and gifts. This is also an area that causes a lot of confusion. There's a clear distinction between discretionary and non-discretionary bonuses. I do apologize if this is repetitive and you've already heard it, but I think there's probably people on the webinar today that don't know the difference. Discretionary is something that you do at a whim, that you decide randomly to, award employees either a bonus or give them a holiday gift or a year-end bonus, whatever the case may be. It's something that's random. It's not contractual. There is no program surrounding it, and it's not guaranteed. Non-discretionary, on the other hand, is something that's guaranteed either because you have an agreement with employees for like commission, or maybe you do a piece rate type of situation, or maybe it is something else, an incentive plan that you offer, like a balanced scorecard or pay for performance plan, etc. So knowing the difference between those two will impact whether or not you have to go back and recalculate your regular rate of pay, essentially impacting overtime calculations. That is important from a DOL perspective because they will be looking at that if they would come in and audit you. So making sure you handle those properly is very important. When you get into gifts at the end of the year, the de minimis rule comes into play. And so the IRS has said, look, a turkey or ham, that's pretty much de minimis. It doesn't have to be taxable to the individuals. But if instead you decide, hey, we're going to give cash or gift cards so employees can go and buy their own supplies for their Thanksgiving dinner, then that now becomes a taxable event. So gift cards are considered cash. It doesn't matter the amount of the value of it, if you will. And the IRS says, look, anything that is considered cash, such as a gift card, has to be taxable. It doesn't matter the value. So you would include that on the paycheck towards the end of the year whenever you issue that to the employee and tax them accordingly. So this, too, will be discussed in our Fringe Benefit webinar, as well as our year-end events. So please check back with us, and we definitely will share even more information surrounding these items. Yes, it's that time of year again. We got to start talking ACA again. I think we're probably, about tired of hearing that, but it is coming up. And forms 1094B and 1095B are due at the end of February if you file paper, and if you file electronically, you have till the end of March. Keep in mind, if you have more than 250 employees, you will have to file that electronically, so you automatically get that grace period. If for some reason you need to file an extension, you can do so by completing Form 8809. And from a retention perspective, we haven't shared this previously, but you do want to keep the forms for at least 3 years. So tuck them away, archive them, put them in a safe place because you do need to retain them for 3 years. Application address at the bottom of this slide if you want to do additional research and read more about these requirements. This slide deck will be sent out after this webinar to all people who attended, so you don't have to write that down. You'll be able to access it once you get the presentation slides in the next couple business days. So, as I said at the beginning, we are narrowing down on 2016. We are aggressively coming up on 2017. And, I want to ask you, have you started thinking about 2017? I know I was talking with a client earlier today who indicated, hey, I've got this in the budget for next year, and she's in a great spot. She's looking ahead. So, are you in that same place? Has your organizational strategic plan been completed, identified? If so, what does that mean for HR and payroll? Do you have it aligned? what are some new initiatives that you want to roll out? Maybe it's surrounding wellness, maybe it's a new pay for performance plan. Start thinking about those things. And one topic that you're going to hear more and more about as we go into 2017 is disruption. So if you're familiar with Airbnb, a couple other companies have really disrupted some of the other industries out there. So not only could it potentially impact you and your industry, but how is that going to impact your ability to recruit talent, to retain talent? And those are the things that you need to be thinking about as we move forward as a society, because the game is changing. It really is. And so you'll see as we move into 2017 that we'll be focusing more on topics like that, helping you to really strategically position your organization and be prepared, and maybe avoid some of the disruptors, or maybe you can become the disruptor. So stay tuned for that. Anxious to see the feedback on your plans for 2017, what's at top of mind for you, and you can share that in the survey by letting me know what topics do you want to hear more about, what comes to mind, and certainly we can look at incorporating that in one of our future webinars. Some of the upcoming events that I wanted to make you aware of, these are listed out on our website for the most part. We will in the very near future be announcing our year-end seminars. So as I indicated, I do apologize, I did not update this slide. The October webinar was pushed back a week to, I think it was like November 2nd. It is on our website and the date is, accurate there, but that's our fringe benefit webinar. We will then, on November 9th, be talking about issues you should be thinking about if you're sending employees to another country. November 29th, we will be in York in the morning and do our annual year-end seminar. That's where we give our payroll tax updates. We'll be talking about some HR topics. Certainly, Department of Labor will be on that agenda, and many other items such as fringe benefits. Remember that 12/1 is that DOL legislation effective date. And then we'll be heading out to Hanover. We'll be doing 2 sessions in Hanover on December 7th. We'll do a morning and an afternoon, and that's to allow for everybody to be comfortable in those facilities. And then for those of you who can't join us locally, we will have a webinar on December 14th where you can plug in, and we'll be having that in the afternoon. That way all time zones are accounted for. So stay tuned for additional information on that. We'll be sending out the agenda and the speakers and so forth in the very near future. So we are at the end of our webinar. We have about 10 minutes or so with questions. And Lois is going to help facilitate that. She's going to read off the questions, and then we'll answer those. Go ahead, Lois.
A good variety of questions on all the different topics. The first one is, what if an employee came to the corporate office to fill out paperwork, for example, with a new hire? Do you have to pay for filling out the paperwork with a union employee?
Yes, if you are having the employee complete paperwork, you required them to report to your location at a certain time, then yes, that's considered hours worked and you should pay them.
Okay, if the travel time is not compensated, for example, an hourly job paid upon arrival at the job site for construction or maybe a stakeout, would I have individuals classified travel time as overhead?
That is a very good question as to if it's considered regular rate or their overhead rate. I will have to get back to you on that. I don't want to misspeak on that. I do want to talk with another member in our organization because I don't know if there are differences on the types of projects that you might have or contracts that you might have. So please, can you do me a favor and put that in as a comment on the survey? That way I can follow up with you and answer that. And if anybody else is interested in that same answer, please make a note on the survey. Then I'll definitely make sure that you receive, a copy of the response.
For newly exempt employees who are paid salary, who travel to our Northern Virginia office for a week, we would pay them for the time they leave their homes in Southern Virginia. What about dinner with the boss, where it is an invitation, but they may not feel comfortable saying no?
That's a real good question. Yeah. So if it's a non-exempt individual, then yes, you definitely pay the travel time. If they're exempt, you don't have to pay any additional compensation, although the Department of Labor is never going to fault you for paying too much. In my opinion, if I'm highly encouraging this individual to participate in a dinner with their boss or the owner, then I would pay them for that. I just think it's, a value add, and it would leave a positive note with the employee, because that employee might encourage some others to attend as well. But certainly I don't know that the DOL has defined it that closely, so it's really up to you and the risk and the way that you want to handle it as an organization.
We have a couple of questions on the inclement weather.
Uh-huh.
What if an exempt employee works at home on an inclement weather day? And another one just says, what if they work from home? So what's the difference with an exempt and a non-exempt if they work at home?
I would imagine that you probably have a policy already in effect for individuals working from home, remote work, and if you don't, then I recommend that you establish that first as to what the parameters are. I'm sure your technology team can verify how long that employee was clocked in or clocked out. Again, if you give them the ability to work from home, you give them the permission, and they go ahead and log onto their computer, even if they spend 15 minutes working and then go out shoveling for the rest of the day, you still have to pay them because they did actually work. It's very similar to employees checking email from home. Even if they're not expressly given approval and they start working from home and checking emails and you become aware of it, you have to pay them. So if you're aware that they are working when they stay home and they have a way to show you and demonstrate they did work, then you truly, absolutely have to pay them.
Okay. If you have a liberal leave policy, would they have to use PTO if they do not come into work?
The law states that you can not reduce a salary individual's pay by partial day increments, and it also states that you do have the ability to require them to exhaust all their paid time off. So that would be your discretion whether or not you want to allow them to carry their balance to use at another time and you pay them, or if you're going to require that they do use their PTO time. It's really up to you as to how you want to do that. Liberal, to me, sounds flexible as well, so you could allow them to shift their hours and so forth. If an employee starts going out of the boundaries and doesn't meet your expectations, then that's where you have a conversation with them to realign the expectations and address more of a behavioral instead of docking pay.
If you close because of weather, can you require salaried employees to work from home?
Yes, you can provide them with an alternate work schedule. So whether that be working from home, whether that be they have to come in now on Saturday, you absolutely can modify work schedules to make up the time that they missed from not being there that day.
Okay. Now we're back to travel again. What about travel from the employee's division office to the corporate office for continuing education or training?
Yes, that should be paid.
Same rules apply.
Same rules as if they would be going to a job site because you are requiring them to travel from one location to another.
This one's on the employee file. How important is the employee's signature to JD?
Job description?
Okay. We had manager supervisors complete an exemption questionnaire for every employee in the company and update/accompany the job description for the FLSA changes. So how important is that employee signature on that job description?
I think it's important because it attests that it was reviewed with the employee and that the employee knows what the expectations are for their essential functions. Another reason it's important is because the DOL auditor, once they look at your payroll records and they look at the job description, they're going to say, oh, let me go talk to Susie Smith. Let me go talk to so-and-so. They're going to randomly select. So they're going to verify that what you have on paper in the job description is truly what that individual does. So if you don't have the employee sign it, they may unknowingly think that their responsibilities are something different. And if they would step out of line and say something that disagrees with what's the job description, you could go back and say, hey, this person actually signed it and they attested this is what they did. And it might be a way for you to defend, a difference among what the employee says versus what the paper says. So I always highly encourage a job description to be completed. If you are having them sign something attesting that they have read it, reviewed it, and understand it, and you might include it on like a performance assessment or some other document like your handbook acknowledgement, then I would just attach a copy of that job description with it so they know what version that individual reviewed and agreed was, in alignment with what they actually do on a daily basis.
Right. Do we have to save paper documents for our personnel files if we have them saved electronically?
No, you don't.
Okay. And then someone has asked if we have a list of everything that needs to be in a personnel file.
Yes, we do have a list.
They would like a copy. So.
All right. So please put that in the survey, and I will make sure to get that sent out to you.
All right. Does a combined PTO, vacation, and sick pay of the 56 hours a year satisfy the new federal contractor requirement for 56 hours of sick pay?
It's my understanding, and I'd have to look at the contract specifically, but it's my understanding that if you already have a policy in place that is all-inclusive, that it does take care of that sick pay parameter, if you will. So if you want to have a separate conversation where I could look at the contract and so forth, I'd be happy to do that.
All right. How about a situation where gift cards were purchased with credit card points or miles, so no money was exchanged? Would that be includable?
Yes, that would still be taxable because it is the value, the market value of the gift card that is the taxable piece. It doesn't matter how the company came to acquire those gift cards because it really is something that the employee is receiving.
Okay. And then who is required to do a Form 1094B and 1095B?
That is whether or not you're an applicable large employer. And so not sure if you are, but that would be the first test, is to go through that. And a lot of companies are partnering with either their payroll vendor or another third-party solution to work through the forms that need to be issued and so forth. Again, that's something that we could talk about in a separate conversation once I can better understand your organization and, your full-time equivalents to see if you truly are an ALE.
And then there were two changes you mentioned required for the new labor law posters as of August. One was the polygraph change, and what was the other one?
It was related to the FLSA. They put in language about nursing mothers, and they also updated it surrounding the new legislation with the overtime rule. This PowerPoint will be made available to you, so you can go ahead and go back and reference that.
All right. And we provide gift cards for service anniversaries. Are these considered taxable?
Yes.
All right. This travel time is typically after hours, though some travel between 12 to 5. Do we pay for travel after hours?
You only pay for travel after hours if they are working during that time. Like I mentioned, if they're checking emails and doing some of those other functions related to your business. But if they are truly just a passenger in an airplane, a car, a train, etc., then no, you do not have to pay them.
All right. A non-exempt employee flies to another city and returns within the same day. All from the start of the business to the return?
I would have to dissect that a little bit to see how much time did they spend as a passenger and how much time was, worked essentially outside of the normal business hours. So we'd have to carve that out a little bit, but I do believe probably a majority of the time, if it's all in a day's work, would be considered paid time.
And you have a suggestion for the best place to get new posters for compliance?
There's a couple companies out there. I know there's a labor law poster company. You also have Poster Elite. If you just do a general Google search, you'll see a couple of the popular ones pop right up. And I would just look for the one that gives you the best pricing. I think anywhere a range between $35 and $50 per all-in-one set, and what I mean by that is that it would be federal and state. It would be all-in-one poster for federal and all-in-one poster for the state, and you should get that combined set for less than $50. You certainly could go out to the Department of Labor and print off all the required notices and posters for free, but then you'd have to sit there and try to consolidate them, do your own laminating and so forth. So the labor probably isn't worth it when you can pick up a set for, between $35 and $50.
And there was just a question again about a transcript of the webinar that will be available.
Yes, we will send out a follow-up blast to the webinar. So the webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our website for well into the future. And then you will also receive a copy of the PowerPoint so you can have it for your records.
And then, should employees be paid for events that are work-related but completely voluntary and not sponsored or required by the employer?
If it's completely voluntary and they're not going to be conducting any type of business while at this seminar, then no, they wouldn't have to be paid.
How about gift cards in the $15 to $25 range as discretionary? Are they taxable?
That is considered taxable, and the reason is because a gift card, no matter the value, is considered cash, and cash is always considered taxable income to the employee.
Our last question is non-exempt employee is asked to travel by car. They would be paid from portal to portal, correct? Even if outside of business hours?
Yes, I do believe the driver should be paid and compensated, especially if they're driving their own vehicle because they're not considered a passenger, then that individual should be paid. Now, what the DOL has not said is how much you have to pay that individual. So, if you truly want to pay them at minimum wage, because that's the only requirement the DOL says is you have to pay them a minimum of this amount, you certainly could do that. So if it's an employee that normally earns $15 an hour and you want to only pay them $7.25 or whatever the minimum wage is in your state for the time that they're driving, go for it. You absolutely could do that. And there was another follow-up question. Go ahead, Lois.
If you are an ALE, do you have to do a 1094B, 1095B versus a 1094C or a 1095C?
The C is really the cover sheet. So the 1094 and 95Bs, those are the ones that you have to complete. The C is really just the cover sheet that needs to be done. And again, it really depends if you're self-funded, fully insured, if you're an ALE, and there's another portion that your carrier will be actually sending out as well. All right, well, we are at 3:02. I thank you so much for being patient. A lot of great questions. Again, if you have any questions that we didn't cover today, please put that in the survey. As soon as we stop the webinar, the survey will come out with a minute or so. You can complete that, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you.